All right, last week we looked at John 3:22 to 4:6, and we saw that essentially it was a contemplative commentary, that kind of last portion in the book, in the chapter 3. And we started into chapter 4, and in there we had looked at the idea that there was this issue with the baptism, and Jesus is leaving the area of Judea, basically because everybody's learning about his baptism stuff, and for whatever reason he wants to move on up to Galilee. And so we start on this trek that he's going through Samaria to get to Galilee. All right, so that's our review for this week. So the story in chapter 4 begins with the geographical and historical information. This is in Galilee, a town in Galilee. Anybody remember the name of the town, just right off the top?
Samaria?
Sychar?
Sychar.
Like that?
Sychar.
Yeah. Okay, and there's in the town of Sychar, there's a field nearby that had a well, which Jacob assumed Jacob had passed to his son Joseph. Now, there's no mention of this transaction taking place in Genesis about strictly this well. There is in Genesis 48:21 through 22, and I'll point to John or Laura if you want to start, about the actual event that probably, provided the land associated with the well.
Then Israel said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers, and to you, as mine is over your brothers, I give the root of the land I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow.
All right, so this was the water well was likely associated with this spot of land, as we said. And then Joseph, of course, would have passed it on to his sons. Anybody remember the names of his sons?
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Very good, very good, okay. And, okay, so, but the issue here was that we were now in Samaria. And the Samaritans, we know we had discussed this before, there's quite a rift, quite a rivalry, and it's not just a friendly rivalry, but kind of a animosity between the Samaritan groups and what we call the Jews, right? The ones in Judea, and we kind of looked at that history from a long time ago. The Assyrians came down and gobbled up the northern tribes, basically, which eventually the Assyrians then brought in their own population of people. They interbred, and they had this mix. So they were no longer a pure blood, and so they were sort of like considered half-breeds by the Jews down south. And so they developed that you're not true Jews, so we don't want to associate with you.
Was Samaria the whole area that was occupied by the 10 tribes?
Yeah, it's both a town and an area, so it has both that kind of confusing names cited to it. So Samaria, technically, oftentimes, just from the context, is really a region, but oftentimes there really was a capital area named Samaria too. And so we got to just keep that in mind there. Okay, so, but in reality, it's part of the Samaritans, since they rejected the Jewish, line, basically, the key was that they did not want to accept. Remember, who did the line go through? Who did the lineage of the Messiah go through once it went from Jacob to one of his sons? Who did it go to?
David?
Judah.
Judah, right. David would come from Judah.
Okay.
Genesis 49:10.
The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his.
All right, and of course, these are kind of, I don't want to say cryptic necessarily, but they're just sort of phrases that are not too familiar with us, what is being said. But essentially what is being said is that the kingship will belong to Judah. It's going to go through his line, all right? So that kind of can make you a little bit mad if you're not in that lineup. So this is where we are in the story, and in John 4:6, we're told that it was the 6th hour, okay? Jesus and his disciples had left the territory, probably of Judea at this time. They traveled, who knows, 20 miles, and it was pretty hot in the day. It's the 6th hour, and Jesus is getting exhausted, and he sends his disciples to the nearby village to go get food, go get some refreshments for them, right?
When they talk about the 6th hour,
Yeah.
okay, it's not like from midnight to 6, so that would be 6 a.m. in the morning. So are we talking really more like toward noon?
Yeah, they're
Because it would be from sunrise to the 6th hour?
You go from basically the quarters, so 6 to 12, 12 to 6, 6 back to midnight and so forth. So this is basically, they would have left at 6 a.m. Presumably the 6th hour would therefore be 12 noon.
Okay.
Approximately, kind of a thing.
I have always wondered that.
Yeah.
And it's like the 6 hour, okay, does that mean which?
Yeah, right.
My
right.
6 hour or your
Exactly.
6 hour?
Exactly right.
Gotcha.
Well,
Thank you.
it's unlikely they would be traveling at night. I know there's no lighted paths and so forth like that, and it doesn't say anything about a nice full moon or that kind of thing. But all right, so Jesus is exhausted. Now remember, we are talking about Jesus, who is God and man, right? He's that person, the God-man, and yet does he exercise his divine privileges to give for himself refreshments and all? No, he doesn't, right? Which is just extraordinary, because in a couple of the chapters, he's going to be feeding, the 5,000, 15,000 people and so forth, and yet he's going to not deny himself these prerogatives that he could easily have exercised, and but he's not going to do it. And you think there's any reason why you can think of that he's doing that?
Not being godly?
Yeah, not
Because,
treating himself.
because that he came to be as man, not as God.
That's excellent. Yep.
Came to serve.
Servant, right?
Came to serve, yeah.
Yeah. Did not come to be served, but to serve, right? Be a ransom for all. Yeah. So let's go into our story here, the proper thing. Here we'll start with John 4:7-9.
A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans."
So we are at a well, right? I mean, the situation is at a water well. Can you think of other episodes where there is something significant occurring around the water well in the scriptures?
Rebecca.
Very good. Isaac, remember, Abraham sent his servant out to find a wife for Isaac, right? And then he prays at this watering hole, the well, and so who comes? Rebecca, and also significant about that. Who else?
What was the leper in the well?
The leper in the well. The farmer in the well.
No, wasn't there a leper, a man who was unclean? He tried to get into the swirling waters.
Oh,
you
that's
think
a
of
pool
it?
of Siloam.
So, you find the New Testament pool of Siloam?
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go. I couldn't
Right.
think what it was.
Water. Yeah, I guess you could kind of think about that as a symbol of water. I'm thinking more along the lines, specifically more associated with a well kind of a thing than associated with Jerusalem. But thank you very much. Yeah. Anything else?
Look,
Did Moses chase away the guys who were harassing?
Very good.
Lamont?
And that's how he met his wife, Zipporah, right? And there was a connection ultimately with his meeting of the Lord there, around there. But even back up a little bit more.
Jacob had a quarrel with the people.
Yes,
in
and that was
Laban.
where he met Rachel, right? Yeah. So it's kind of interesting that we have these significant events that are associated with wells and watering holes and all. So in John 4:7, that they read, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Did you not read that? You did read that. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." So the assumption is Jesus is likely alone, because it says he sends his disciples in to buy food, right? And then this woman approaches the well, and the presumption we have with her is she is also alone. Obviously, there's no sexual kind of connotations associated with this story at all, but it's just the fact that here comes a woman by herself in the middle of the day to get water, and it's a hot day. And would you anticipate that happening?
No.
Okay, why?
Because the women would go out first thing in the morning to get the water for the day. She
Yeah.
would be an outcast, therefore she'd go in the middle and nobody else would be.
Right, that's exactly kind of that thing you look at, that she was basically ostracized in her own community. She was a woman of ill repute, you might say, in some cases. So there's this shame associated with her. She wants to avoid being in contact with other women for the most part. So she'll go out in the heat of the day and laboriously go out and get this water just to avoid encountering other people. So there's no mention of anybody else in this interaction here. And since it's midday, it's peak heat, so you would want to avoid that kind of work during that time. Now, we think of normally there, you've seen the pictures of the wishing well and so forth like that, right? You got this bucket on the rope and it's going down, you just do the crank down, pick it and then reel it back up and you get your water. And, there could have been wells like that, but obviously at this one, either maybe the rope was on it, but you had to bring your own bucket or your own cup or something to get water out of it. The story is on this well, it is 100 feet deep. It basically is what you're getting at. So this is not something where you can, lean over down and get some water somehow. You need a rope, you need the means to do it. And so possibly the rope was present, but he didn't have the cup, certainly. And Jesus' thirst prompts him then to start this conversation with the woman. So if you look at it, she was, it was shocking that Jesus would even partake of conversing with this woman. And not only, obviously because, first of all, she was a Samaritan, strike one, okay? She was a woman, strike two, because generally speaking, it was a patriarchal society, we know that, and typically there was just sort of this distance between men and women for the most part. And then strike three, she was a woman who you would not want to associate with, so she should have been out of the game. And maybe, she largely felt that way. So Jesus starts this conversation, and I'm sure it was just, it was an abrupt request from her. He approaches this, it was purposeful, right? He had to do this for purposes. He disregards all these man-made biases and prejudices. He just, throws them down and just straight gets to the point here with her. And I think that obviously would have been just a massive shock to her system. But what he sees in her, he obviously sees her as, a real human being in need. So even though he himself is in desperate need of water, he is seeing her need before his needs. So if it was me, I would have grabbed the bucket out of her hand. I need some water, woman. So at any rate, Jesus, of course, is meek and control of all his needs and passions and so forth. And he knows he's going to use this as a means of her conversion. He's not exercising some sneaky evangelistic technique. This was Jesus who was going to very purposeful. He will go ahead and use the situation to best accommodate the needs of what is required and bringing her to knowledge. But he's going to do it genuinely and all. So
I think this story also brings up the fact that we're trying to make her into being the most sinful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there isn't such thing as some sin, more sin, most sin. Sin is sin. And I think that's kind of what Jesus was trying to let us know. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are, how, what your reputation is, that he came for everyone.
Yeah, and you're not beyond his reach, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly true. Very right. It's good point there. It certainly can be used to illustrate that how the depth of sin you think you're in, Jesus is still, you're not unsavable, basically. Yeah.
I said unreachable. You're not
Yeah.
unreachable.
Okay. Thank you.
Unreachable, unsavable.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. So it's just kind of interesting that he is going to basically use his own vulnerability in this case as a man to sort of depend upon her, and this is going to cause this engagement of conversation. But here you have the Son of God, who basically, remember back in the days of the wilderness wanderings, generated the water out of the rock, okay, and yet will not provide for his own needs at this point. So he's basically, we look at it in that sense, well, he is essentially stooping to her level, to our level, essentially. It is a privilege for her to provide him water. Now, she has no clue about that, but that's the way that we ought to ultimately see it. Jesus initiates the conversation, and undoubtedly she would have, had he not started the conversation, well, she would have completely ignored him, no question about that. But he kind of forces a reply from her, as he states this need, to give me something to drink. And his disciples, it says in the next verse, his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. So John gives us details just so we know where the disciples were and why Jesus lacked the means, why he didn't, because they probably took the cup, So you could have left me the cup, guys. anyway, so we realized, you know, in those days, obviously, there's no refrigeration or anything like that, so you've got to go local with where you're going to get your foodstuffs and all your supplies, and because stuff spoils, there's no refrigeration. And I'm thinking also that possibly he wants them out of the way, okay, for this engagement. He doesn't want them, it's not that he doesn't want them seeing it, but he doesn't want them saying anything and screw it up, you know? Kind of like, just let me talk to her myself and you'll see what's going on, but I don't need you at this point to mess things up for me, you know? It's kind of, that's what, it just seems like the timing is just perfectly set up, obviously, by the Lord himself. It just goes. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that he went out of his way to be at the well. They could have gone another route.
Right.
And he has an appointment with this woman.
Right.
She doesn't know it. The disciples don't need to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
he has a plan here.
Right. And the
before
timing
us.
is obviously by God himself as happening. That this is not just a coincidence of things happening, right? This was something that was set up in advance, that she would meet with him at this time, this moment, and he was all this. The setting was just perfect, right?
And the fact that she was also alone, because if she had gone, if it had happened when the other women were there, it would have been a whole different circumstance. So
Right.
that whole.
All right, so let's move on. Samaritan woman says to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" And then, for Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. So again, Jesus appears. He shocks her by just talking to her, gets her attention, and opens her ears. Nobody else would have been, approached with such, without all the bigotry and all. So to have anyone sweep that aside was something she was not used to. All the things she was used to being ostracized and all those things. Now, does she doesn't deny the request, right? But she doesn't fill it either. Okay, at this point at least.
Did Jesus ever get water?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, I mean, it's interesting there. But she doesn't deny it, and so she's befuddled by all this, and I think she wants to make sure, you understand what you're asking here, who it is you're talking to, in terms of like how the person, I'm a woman, I'm a Samaritan, she says to him, and you're a Jew, and we don't basically share utensils, and that was at least the lowest, in terms of the minimum thing. You at least wouldn't share their utensils because you would consider the other unclean. Not for germs and so forth that we look at it, but in terms of religious ways and so forth. So John adds the commentary about explaining the bigotry and animosity there. They have no dealings, but reality is like at least they don't do the cups and things like that, because the disciples, they went into town to buy the food at least. So hey, it's not complete animosity, and they're not in battle, But in essence, we do see kind of the controversy, you might say, in Luke 9:51 to 56, just to get the spirit of what it was like in certain towns.
Sorry, I looked at the wrong one. Luke 9. Okay, 51.
Yes.
When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him, who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went along to another village.
Okay, so why didn't they take him in? What was the specific reason?
Because his face was set toward Jerusalem.
Exactly. They found out where he was going. He's going to Jerusalem, okay? This guy's cheering for the wrong team, okay? I mean, you get that. It's like he's coming, he's visiting you, and he's going to go support the other team. This is crazy. So they didn't want anything to do with him. So it's sort of like that. This was just something that they held in static there. Worship location would be something that she's going to bring up later. Okay, let's read John 4.
But it's interesting that James and John's response would be, "Hey, let's go
It is.
down
It is.
and just consume them."
and Jesus just dismisses them, right? He turned and rebuked them, actually, and then they went on to another village, which obviously hosted them and so forth. But certain villages you're going to get up, but Jesus did not, go ahead and call fire down on them, in essence, simply because they mistreated him. And we need to take that attitude to heart ourselves, right? We just can't get angry and mad at people who maybe have their prejudices and so forth and do not like us for whatever reason. John 4:10-12.
Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock."
Okay, thank you. So Jesus now is answering her at this point. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Jesus is emphatic about this 4 times. He addresses her as you, so he's basically directing, certainly to you in particular, to her. And Jesus now replies to her presumption of these long-standing bigotries, but he doesn't actually, he just dismisses them as being anything of any consequence in reality. And he completely turns around the whole thing of, I asked to drink from you, but you should be asking something from me, right? He says the gift of God, that phrase. What comes to mind? What's your ideas on that? If you knew the gift of God.
Well, faith and salvation.
Okay, all right.
Faith that leads to salvation.
Okay, excellent.
Actually, Jesus himself.
Jesus himself, very good, yep.
Gift of the living water.
Which would be,
Would be God, Jesus,
okay, all right.
that
Eternal life, and I think all these things basically are incorporated into that thought there. Now, there is an interesting aspect of this. I don't think it's the right one, but it is interesting because the Samaritans, they essentially they upheld the first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the Pentateuch or the Torah, and they at least said we believe in that, we accept that. And so one commentator says this possibly refers to the Pentateuch as the gift of God, and God's gift is the Pentateuch essentially. And so he's saying if you knew the Torah, if you knew the law, then you would have known who it is that is saying to you, okay, give me a drink and so forth. That's a possibility. I kind of doubt it in that sense, but it was possible. It'd be sort of like back in John chapter 5 when Jesus talks to the Jews and says, you search the scriptures, but they speak of me, that kind of idea there. So, but it could be like Garrett said, eternal life. We're also looking at the Holy Spirit, who he will mention in John chapter 7. I have that up there, 7:38-39.
He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified.
Yeah. Now this is equating the idea of the living water and the Holy Spirit. I don't think Jesus is really particularly pointing to the Holy Spirit yet. I think that has to be later revealed when he is talking in John chapter 7. But obviously, it's to some extent to the whole idea that does include it. But I think the idea is really the gift of God is Jesus himself. That really connects with me, because how do we read it in John 3:16? For God so loved the world
that he sent his
he
only.
gave his only Son, that whoever believeth in him, right? So I think it connects more with Jesus himself being the gift of God, and then out of it would come all these other things that we've just talked about. So there is lots of choices in here, but he says to her, and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, who it is. You ever seen those political news clips where a politician gets, a cop stops him from being drunk or speeding? Do you know who I am? And so is this idea of, oh, man, my position, you got to understand who I am. I write the laws, I don't follow them, so to speak. But Jesus is, because there is the idea is I'm going to get something out of it. You get out of a ticket or something like that. But Jesus is using his to basically ensure that she understands she can get something from him. So it's totally the opposite there.
But she does say, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?"
Yeah,
So, of course, God, Jesus is greater than our
absolutely.
father Jacob.
Absolutely.
And Jacob really was not.
Wasn't the best example, right? A living example of what you call a spiritual
Shyster.
person.
Right.
You're quite right, Peggy.
Right. Well, she was so stuck on the physical. The reason why she said that is because it was Jacob who
Jacob's
built the well. It's his well, and that's why
Yes.
they continually have water,
Yes.
physical water.
Yes.
So she's still not understanding. There's what he's talking about is spiritual.
You are
here.
absolutely
Or
right.
who
This
he-
idea- She is still focused on the literal thing. We're going to talk about that shortly in just
Right.
a bit here. But you're right. And living water, I just wanted to point out, it is used oftentimes both in a sense the literal way and the metaphorical way, figurative way in the scriptures. In Isaiah 41:18, because water is so associated with life, really, right? I mean,
Right.
we see what happens on the Texas heat and we don't get rain. I mean, I complain about it. But Isaiah 41:18, Miss Elizabeth?
I will open rivers in high places and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water.
Right, these pools of water, springs of water springing out, probably. Interestingly enough, I mean, even in Genesis chapter 2, there's this, Ben, do you feel like reading Genesis 2? It's kind of a long paragraph, 10 through 14, but it's just description after this business of the tree of life and all. It goes to water.
Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from it parted it became 4 riverheads. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one which skirts the whole land of Havilah, and there is gold, and the gold of the land is good. Bethlehem and the onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gishon. It is the one which goes around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Hiddekel, and it is the one which goes towards the east of Assyria. 4 rivers.
So, I mean, there's just 4 rivers are associated with this Eden kind of stuff there, so it's significant, the whole water aspect. Of course, I know at the end of the book of Revelation, there's a water river there as well, but the idea there is all this stuff is quite literal. But then also there's the idea of a very figurative understanding of it. And Heather, if you don't mind reading Jeremiah 2:13.
For my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water.
Right, so God is comparing himself to a fountain of living water. Also repeated kind of in Genesis 17:13.
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, Genesis. Jeremiah 17:13.
O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water.
Right, so obviously metaphorical language, figurative, the idea of God being life himself, right? And also, but there's, in Jeremiah 31, there's another passage, Jeremiah 31:12. I really like this, it's kind of a neat song that I used to sing, but we never sing that anymore. But Jeremiah 31:12.
They shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of the Lord, over the grain, the wine, and the oil, and over the young of the flock and the herd. Their life shall be like a watered garden, and they shall languish no more.
So, when you think of a peaceful place, what do you typically think of? I mean, pardon?
We're walking through the garden.
The garden. I mean, it's just such, it just captures so much figure. It seems so peaceful and all right. You're in the natural realm, and yet to speak of a garden, but then you add to it a watered garden. I mean, it just adds on top of it, the epitome of sort of peace and tranquility, flourishing, and so forth like that, beauty and loveliness. And so I think it's just sort of the idea of this business with the water and the eternal, the fountain of life and so forth of this water, that it's captured in all these passages that we're reading here. So in one sense, she could be correct in understanding about this flowing, that Jesus is going to provide this eternal, what does he call it? I'm sorry. Living water, go to giving you living water, which basically the idea of living water can be easily understood as simply flowing water. Okay, that's really what it kind of technically means. And again, we can look at that as being metaphorical or literal. But the idea is it's flowing water. It's not stagnant water. Stagnant water, you get pond scum and the other stuff, right? Who wants that? So you want flowing water. It's clean and life associated with it. And so, you know, she could, it's not necessarily bad that she's sort of thinking along these lines, but Jesus is thinking more, obviously, of the metaphorical understanding of it, but she hasn't grasped that yet.
I think it just, because it really struck me in Jeremiah 2, where he said the people committed two evils. One, they forsook him, and then they built cisterns to hold water, and they really couldn't hold it. So it was like they not only rejected God, but they were trying in their own ways to retain this water, and it wasn't, going. So it's, I think it's just a picture of what we do.
So by their own means, they wanted to basically have life.
Yeah, sort of like the Tower of Babel and, all the other things, even Adam and Eve, you'll be like God.
Right. Sati, so you were pointing earlier about the literalness of what was going on here. And we think back in multiple occasions, it wasn't just her, but many instances, I'll just mention a few of them here, that people misunderstood what Jesus was talking about. They couldn't understand the bigger picture involved. We look at John 2, which we looked at a few weeks back. What was the issue there? He says to them, destroy this temple, right? And in 3 days I will rebuild it or reconstruct it. Was he talking about the literal temple? No, but everybody mistook him for that, right? And even the disciples. That was the Jews and the disciples. In John 3, Nicodemus, right? Being born of water and the Spirit. How can this happen? Right? So and Jesus said, aren't you the teacher of Israel? Don't you know these things? So he mistook it. You think, obviously, here at the woman of the well, John 4:31-34, even later on in this very story, the disciples, Jesus is going to say, they're going to bring him the food, and he's going to say, I don't have, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, basically. He says, did anybody feed them? You don't understand. So, and then in John 6, the feeding of the 5,000, the grumbling of the Jews that he wanted to call himself, the bread of life and eat his flesh and drink his blood. They mistook that literally. John 11:11, disciples making mistake when he said Lazarus is asleep. When he said Lazarus is asleep, they thought he literally meant, well, leave him alone, he'll get well, right? And no, he's dead, guys. And then in Mark 7, you have the disciples when Jesus was commenting about what defiles a person. That is, it's not what he eats, but it's what comes out of him, right? And then in Mark 8, the disciples again, Jesus, when he tells them, the disciples to avoid the leaven of the Pharisees, and they're like, wow, what's wrong with their bread, right? So it's referring to the teaching, of course. So it wasn't just her, it was multitudes. Many times people misunderstood him, so got to give her a little credit for him. All right, so the woman says to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, the well is deep, where do you get that living water? So she hasn't quite figured out, obviously, what Jesus is talking about. She does address him as what? As sir. I mean, it's technically sort of like Lord, but obviously she does not know him in any sense as Lord, but it's sort of a respectful term, at least, as using the word sir. She points out, you don't have anything to draw water with here, so I don't know why you're making all these statements, basically. She assumes the living water must come from the well, which was, as I said, 100 feet deep. So at this point, I mean, I think she's sort of starting to be a little skeptical of what she's hearing and starting to kind of be a little on the dismissive side. So it's the idea of, I don't see any other water sources around here, so where are you going to get this living water, right? And she says, are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. So, she's building creds around here. So the angle here is maybe she wants to, in an effort to get this conversation over with, okay, she's just going to say, okay, let me stop your grandiose thoughts here. Look who gave us this well. This was Jacob. Can you do something more so than what he did? I mean, him and his flocks and his kids and all. And this well has been here for 1,500 years. That's a long time, okay? That's a lot of legacy associated with that. Are you greater than what Jacob was able to do? Are you more significant? You look at it this way. The story of Jacob takes up half of the book of Genesis. A half of it. That's a lot of content there, right? That's pretty significant. Abraham, the father of the faith, only took up half of that, 12 books of Genesis. That's pretty significant, right? Most chapters are dealt with you in Genesis. You carry some significance. So it wasn't inappropriate for her to reference Jacob in that way. All right, so let's continue on with John
7:38.
Does that put that down there? Okay. That was the one with the living water.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna skip that one.
Whoever believes in him.
Yeah.
That y'all already did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
John 4:13 to 15 is another one. Are you next?
No, it's Gabriel.
I'm sorry, Gabriel?
13:15.
Yep.
Jesus answered and said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water that I give him will never thirst ever. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing into eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so I will not be thirsty nor come back to draw.
Okay. Does Jesus sort of scold her for her literalism and misunderstanding? No, he doesn't. I mean, he's just sort of going to continue on, try and explain it to her. Does he argue about this issue with greatness of Jacob versus himself? No, he doesn't. He just dismisses that, right? He doesn't disparage Jacob or anything, but he does add more understanding to what is going on here. And the idea is, whoever drinks of this water, Jacob's water, you're going to continue to get thirsty, right? It's just a physical satisfaction in there. So Jesus is now pointing far more seriously towards the metaphorical, towards the physical, the non-literal understanding of this. Okay, so he talks about the internal well, the springing up of eternal life. Okay, so what does it all mean? Well, Jesus now has jumped to the spiritual application. Physical water only remediates, the physical thirst of all. So he's extrapolating that this life only offers the temporary satisfaction for body and soul. But he's pointing into the soul and basically getting that every soul, every person has a soul that is longing, right? That is longing for something that would be fulfillment for them, a permanence of life, of joy, of purpose, love, meaning, things like belonging. It's that, that deep inside sense that we all have, that there is more to this life than simply the physical life that we have, right? So he's pointing to her, to that deep inside soul that she has and that she's aching about. Okay, so the woman says to him, Sir, give me this water, so that I won't be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. So obviously she's still stuck in the literalistic understanding. So almost, she's kind of like in okay, I'll play your little game here, okay? Whatever this eternal stuff means, fine. Just make it so I don't have to come here and draw water, okay? It's just settle, okay, let's just do that. It's all about personal convenience for her. There's no serious recognitions of Jesus' offer. Okay, let's read the last section here, John 4:16 to 18. Back to John.
He told her, Go, call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, You are right when you said you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true.
All right, so she
You're
says.
gonna leave us hanging there?
What's that?
I said, you're gonna leave us hanging there?
Yeah, right. Jesus says, go call your husband and come here. So this one statement, this one little statement, okay, he has got to shock her into understanding what he's talking about. So he's, okay, almost like a change in the subject, but not quite. He's going to connect it with it ultimately. But the idea here is that he is going to force her to recognize something that she is obviously attempting to hide and to not reveal. And he completely shatters that, she has this sort of situational control. She maybe is playing games, trying to be religious. So he's going to just lay it out there. She refuses to see or just is plain ignorant of the spiritual need, right? The question for a test, this is a test for her, okay? Since this water is so wonderful, we want to share it with somebody, our significant other, a person we love, right? So go get this person you love. Certainly, it's kind of like you're married. I don't know that they wore wedding bands and so forth, the things that we do here to show that, obviously, overtly. But it forces her reply. She has to reply to this query, okay, or to this command. The woman answers him, I have no husband, okay? So she replies that she had none. Was she technically correct? She was technically correct. Literally correct, okay? Is absolutely right that she said that. But I think her reply, because I would typically read this normally in the sense of sort of a woe is me, a self-pitying mode. You know, I don't have a husband, sort of like a defeatist kind of attitude. And after reading this more, no. This was a sort of, this none of your business kind of a thing is what it really amounted to. She wanted to mislead him, to deceive him basically, with a sense of, I'm not married. Okay, that's really what she was kind of getting at. I may be an old spinster or a maid or something like that, but you know, I don't have a husband. So let's not worry about that kind of thing. So she does answer technically correct. And Jesus is going to say, you are correct. Okay, you're technically correct on that. You're right in saying I have no husband. And then he's going to basically now expose everything. For you have had 5 husbands. Okay, now this was like, nobody was supposed to know about this. Certainly not some unknown traveler, right? You remember back in chapter 1, I think it was Nathaniel, basically, as Jesus sees under the fig tree and all, he's like, you know, how can you see me, you know, this thing. But the idea here is, perhaps, you know, nobody really knew how many marriages she actually had entered into, except herself, in that understanding. So it was not information that anybody really would have easily known unless you talked to her or knew her well, kind of a thing. So this was just like, he just basically saw through her whole charade here, right? So now she's kind of caught in this trap here. And so Jesus says, okay, what you have said is true. We're going to basically end it here, but clearly the 5 husbands, when you think about, you know, divorce and marriage back in those days, you could divorce on grounds of like infidelity, adultery, and so forth like that. That was certainly one way of doing it, just sort of general immorality. I mean, there are some cases where you burnt the guy's toast and he could, you know, be upset about it and divorce you, but.
Sounds like today.
Yeah, well, right, and I think that's true. I made that point in my notes here that we would have shrugged it off. Only 5, you know, kind of thing.
And were they divorced? Did some of them die? I'm thinking you see the Black Widow.
This is true. You know, we don't know the full background. Maybe there were some.
And maybe the proper answer for her should have been, which one?
Right.
Yeah.
Divorce. You gotta remember too, at the time, you know, like even Old Testament before that, the reason that divorce was even stated was because men could abandon women like crazy and they had nothing to go back to. That was the whole point of it.
Yeah.
She at that time still could never like started the divorce. So it almost leads you to either A, that many people had left her, which I don't think is true, or she just was in immoral situations.
Yeah. So whatever the situation, she was now in an illicit situation of not having any husbands, but just, as we would say, shacking up in that sense. And so Jesus, obviously, this was partly why she was probably coming down to the well in the first place at this hour of the day, and wanting to avoid all the normal, you know,
Gossip.
friendships. Yeah, all the gossip and stuff.
I never really thought about this too much before, but it's amazing that she could have been married 5 times. Because usually, if you're divorced, you're kind of like shunned, and nobody, you know, another man wouldn't want to marry you. But maybe there was something about her, or she went to different towns, or I don't know. But it's interesting that he would know that, because obviously it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
maybe
no,
it
it's
still
always.
speaks to her character, like, and the kind of men that wanted her.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't know the exact meaning behind, were they real husbands, or was that just the people that she was intimate with for a period of time? And he's just exposing that in a way that lets her know that he knows in her intimate details of her life.
Yeah.
Or if they really were like legitimate marriages where the men that she married didn't care about that.
Yeah.
And the fact that he knew that and continued to talk with her
Right,
is
right.
another
I
amazing
mean,
point.
can you imagine the shock if, there's skeletons in all of our closets somewhere, and if Jesus were to talk to us and then suddenly bring out something that nobody knows that except for me, kind of thing, that would just utterly, if we had an EKG, I'd like to see that. So her heart rate would have been probably racing all of a sudden, I would think, to hear somebody all of a sudden confront her like that, but yet still do it in such a gentle manner. That's the other thing that he does. He's not, accusing, you whatever. You can come up with all kinds of names to describe, what other people may have called her, but he never addressed her in that fashion. He was always gentle and kind to her, wanting to steer her in this direction. And basically, he kind of lets her play along, and then suddenly he has to basically expose it for what it really is. He has her full attention this time, and now we can get down to brass tacks, you might say. We'll
And
find.
in the first man she encountered that actually wanted to give something to her instead of take from her.
Yeah.
So I think
True.
that would be shocking for her. That
Yeah.
She would have her guard up. She would be like, what do you want from me?
That is a good point. She's been pretty defensive,
Yeah,
probably.
like what guys ever come over and wanted to help me
Yeah.
or give me something?
Right.
Usually they're taking from me.
Right. They want my body
So
or
you would be
whatever.
defensive, So that's what it makes me think of, that she just didn't really even know how to handle that kind of approach.
Mhm.
Like, who has ever come to me and wanted to help me or to provide me with something like you're offering?
That's a good point, because we get a mindset sometimes, right, in our own, how we go about, how we look at life, and we can easily just kind of have that, defeatist idea, or, nobody loves me sort of a thing, and that can certainly cause just an entire thing of events to happen that don't necessarily have to occur, because we believe in something that just isn't true, but we cause ourselves to believe it, convinced ourselves of that.
Well, and for her, it doesn't look like she's ever had anyone do that. So you can only go off of your own experiences.
Right, yeah.
Her whole life has been one of being used and abused, and it's not that she's guiltless in all of it.
Right.
I'm just saying,
Right.
there's kind of a cycle here, obviously.
Yeah.
And then I think it's just interesting that Jesus doesn't make her feel. He speaks the truth to her. He still holds her to the line.
Yeah.
He's when he says you speak the truth, what he's really saying is you're lying. He's
Yeah.
saying you're
Right,
telling
exactly.
me you're
Right.
telling me the truth to make yourself feel better. Like technically, you said this is
Yes.
true, but you're lying by omission.
Yes,
and
exactly
I can see right
right.
through your
Exactly.
dishonesty here.
Yes.
And so he's not trying to just make her feel good about herself.
Yeah.
He's telling her exactly what she's doing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's exactly how I think. She basically was saying just enough to be correct, but not enough to really show the whole story. That's quite right. And I think, like you're saying, we can get in this pattern of, this is my life. All I'm set up, this is all I'm made for, is to just do this marriage and remarriage kind of a thing, and have a failed, repetitive cycle of things. And so certainly Jesus is going to fracture that whole understanding and show her who he is in light of this.
Well, I think it's common in our society today, especially for people who don't have any idea of the eternalness of our lives, because it's like, is this all there is?
Right.
And if I'm not getting all the good stuff out of life, I'm just downtrodden, and what's the point? Because if
Yeah.
you don't, I mean, if you think you die and that's it,
Right,
there's
and
not much.
yeah, that's the point that, for her, this was her thing, but for us, it may be, I've got to collect the most toys, the most stuff, this is my life, it's a material world out there, and that's all I'm living for. And Jesus is showing her, no, there's the whole world on the inside, the soul, that we need to really address is the problem. So, yeah, good points. Anything else? Okay, I'll be out again for the next 3 weeks. Eric will come following.